Hello and welcome. My name's Patricia Genat, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this wonderful, it's going to be wonderful, I assure you, Adelaide Conference for ALIA 2016. The theme for the conference this year, Engage, Create, Lead. You're all going to know those words very well by the end. I'd like to open the conference this morning with a traditional welcome. We do, I think, have a small group who were going to come and perform an opening ceremony for us. They've been caught up in the wet weather. For those of you who are not Adelaide people, you'll know that we're so unused to rain that we don't allow enough time to drive in places. But I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners. The land on which we meet today is the traditional land of the Kaurna people, and we respect their spiritual relationship with this country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, the beautiful plains and the hills, and that their cultural heritage and beliefs are still very important to the living Kaurna people today. We recognise their elders past and present, and we say thank you. I'd like to also, there's going to be quite a few welcomes in the first half of this morning. My first welcome is to the Lord Mayor, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor, Mr. Martin Haese. I'm going to invite him up to the podium to officially open the conference, and then we can have some fun.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to sunny Adelaide. Welcome to the City of Adelaide for the Australian Library and Information Association National Conference. And I must say, it's a great turnout, and I'm a great believer in first impressions. And I was just sharing with Bernie that the first impressions are astounding. Just the presentation, everything that's been done to prepare this conference, well done to ALIA already. And this is just the beginning of, I'm sure, what's going to be a wonderful few days. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on Kaurna land and that we pay respect to elders past and present, and we honour their deep connection with the land, which is very important for us to do here in South Australia. I acknowledge Patricia Genat, ALIA President, special guests from Singapore, led by Elaine Ng, National Library Board CEO, very special welcome. Conference Program Committee, I'd like to welcome Alan Smith, the Director of the State Library of South Australia. I'd like to welcome all of our intrastate, interstate and overseas guests. A very warm welcome to the City of Adelaide, to each of you. Ladies and gentlemen, delegates, lovely to see you. Welcome to the 5th most livable city in the world. It's one of the great accolades which we like to share with everyone here in Adelaide, and something over many years which we work very hard, not only to protect, but also to enhance. And I do hope that you have an opportunity to get out and about and explore our beautiful city. I'm sure the weather's going to improve, but I said this morning that it's wonderful conference weather. Lovely weather to be inside and enjoy the conference, but it will clear and I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to have a look around our absolutely wonderful city. I learned something this morning. I heard about the glam sector. Galleries, libraries and museums. So there you are, I'm part of the glam sector this morning. I think that's just terrific. So I think you can all own that one. I think that's just great. Now you're right here in the City of Adelaide's cultural hub, and North Terrace is indeed a very special place, because I don't think there's a street anywhere in Australia that just has such a wonderful mix of cultural, learning, arts, government, institutions in one place. So here we are at the Adelaide Convention Centre, which we're very proud of, but you are within a very short walking distance, of course, to the State Library of South Australia, the museum, the art gallery, Government House, Parliament House, a number of universities, the National Wine Centre, Botanic Gardens and so many more, including of course the Adelaide City Council Library, which would only be 400 metres to the east of from where we are now. And that's a relatively new facility which has been open for only 2.5 years. And I do encourage everyone, please, to have a good look at the Adelaide City Council Library on Rundle Mall, just above the Apple store. And I'm sure that Anne, who I know is here this morning, will show you through, and it's something we are indeed very, very proud of. Also, we encourage you to have a look at the Mortlock wing of the State Library of South Australia. This is a wonderful piece of history in South Australia, named after John Andrew Tennant Mortlock, following his very significant bequest to the state of South Australia. This library, again on North Terrace, has been listed as one of the world's 5 most beautiful libraries by the Huffington Post. I think only in the last 12 months that was awarded. Alan's nodding. It's a beautiful, stunning building, so please do take the time to have a look. This building was opened in 1886 after 18 years of construction, and it really is an architectural masterpiece. It is something just to behold. And it's interesting because the 1880s in South Australia was indeed a boom time, and much of the grand buildings which we honour and treasure here in South Australia were built during that period of the 1880s, which was following a boom in copper, which really, I think, provided a lot of the resources for these wonderful buildings which we treasure so much today. I'm an avid reader, and I'm an avid follower of history, and I have a great admiration for the world's library and information service professionals. So again, it's just wonderful to have you all here in Adelaide. My sister, in fact, is a corporate librarian who's been working for the federal government for many years and currently works for the ACCC in Sydney and in Canberra. Library and information professionals are vitally important to the development and to the growth of our communities right around the nation. The library is often thought of as the third space, not home, not work, but somewhere different, a retreat, an escape, a place to learn, a place to create, to socialise, to think, a place to grow, and a place to develop. Libraries are places where, physical or virtual, that bring people together to pursue, I think, the great time-honoured matter of lifelong learning. And I've been a university lecturer for some 7 years, and I teach entrepreneurship to up-and-coming entrepreneurs. And I personally value just the great honour of teaching, but more importantly, the great honour of all of us learning and the role that you will play in not only teaching but enabling people to learn. It's very, very special. South Australia has many innovative resources right here in the city and in our local communities, in our institutions and in our schools. Innovations such as the South Australia Public Library Network One Card system helps to make Adelaide one of the most livable cities through easily accessible and easily shareable information. Indeed, we live in the information age, and I think that puts you very much front, left and centre of what's happening socially, culturally and commercially in our society right around Australia. I do encourage you to visit our State Library. I do encourage you to visit our City Library. As I said aforementioned, they are just wonderful institutions that we like to share with everyone. Our City Library, we like to describe it as a place of possibility. Our library mission revolves around lifelong learning, supported by our goals of facilitating experimental learning, challenging conventional thinking, and providing quality connections, all of which lead themselves, as you know, to self-expression, creativity and discovery. And our city very much has a 4-point plan about becoming a smart, green, creative and livable city. And Smart City talks about technology, and that's something you're very familiar with and work with all day. But creativity is incredibly important to the growth of our cities. Creativity, in my view, fosters everything. It grows innovation, it helps the arts, it helps lateral thought, it helps experimentation, and it just helps us think beyond the box every time. And I think a creative society is a hallmark of a good society. Our Adelaide City Library has a media and digital creation lab, a maker room with 3D printers, a digital education workshop, and quite a number of flexible workspaces. The City Library has far exceeded our expectations in terms of members and visitations in only 2.5 years. So thank you to ALIA. Thank you for choosing Adelaide, of course, for your conference. And ladies and gentlemen, please do get out and about and enjoy, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was very welcome. The good news is that our group from Towndy College who will be doing the welcome have arrived, and so we will be enjoying their welcome a little later in the morning. My warm welcome is out to you, and I've met some of you, I know some of you, and I hope to meet many more of you. Just do me one favour, rather than have me bobbing down to find out what your name is, remind me. The brain is a sieve, especially in a conference when sometimes you're out of context and so am I. I wanted to just take, I'm been allowed 3 minutes to speak with you briefly before we move on. And I'm going to introduce in a minute Bernie McSwain, the chair of the wonderful South Australian committee who's put this conference together. I arrived here to work in Adelaide in 2003, and I've grown to love the sunshine, not evident today, the wine, obviously, the smell of the desert in the air, and in 10 sleeps' time, I'm putting the tent on the roof and heading up to the northern Flinders. And also the lovely people, and I hope that you find some delights while you're here. Because engage, create and lead is the theme of this year's conference, it's been playing on my mind a bit. I was lucky a couple of weeks ago to be able to participate in the recent IFLA conference in Columbus, Ohio, and I met with staff and members of library associations from all around the world, and I met with an awful lot of Australians as well. As always, it delights me when I realise that for a small country of 23 million people, we manage to be so good in so many ways. We change the world and we make it better. Your opportunities for engagement are wide open today. I was sharing with the first-timers at breakfast this morning, which was a lovely breakfast and a lovely conversation. And they were given all the tips about how to engage, become part of the professional development group, nominate to be on the board, be part of your local group, advocate, and ALIA does advocacy very well, encourage new members, and this is going to be one of the few times when we do ask the audience, but I thought I might ask, if you're an ALIA member, would you mind putting your hand up? All right, thank you very much. If you're sitting next to somebody who put their hand up and you're not a member, you might like to ask them why they're a member. And I hope that the answer is a good one. For those of you who are members and you've forgotten why, there's plenty of people with name tags on who can help you. There are 2 special engagements that I want to encourage you to do during the time that we're here. I want you to think about changing. We talked this morning with the first-timers about the fact that the attitudes and skills and your innate self that you bring to a new profession or a new degree or a new area of study or a new job, they're you, and they don't change an awful lot over your adult life. But we can change, and it's important that we embrace the concept of change if we need to make that place a better one. And I do want you definitely to enjoy the time that you're here. I have one task for every single one of you. I do not want to look around the exhibition hall, the conference centre, the hallways, and see any single sippers. People sitting on their own or standing on their own with a cup of tea or coffee. So if you're an introvert and you've had enough of talking to people by morning tea, you're going to have to turn your back and look at the view, because somebody is going to come up to you and talk to you. And for those of you who don't know how to initiate those sorts of conversations, I'll give you exactly the same advice that I gave to the first-timers today, and that is to remind you that we are all innately selfish beings, and we love to be asked about us. So, the second thing in the conference logos and theme for the week is create. so what I want you to do now is to pull these things out. And while you're doing that, you can make sure they're on silent, which of course you've already done. And then I want you to open up the camera and do that turn-aroundy thing. Is there an official word for that? All right, and then take a selfie. All right, if you're a first timer, that's going to be your second selfie on your machine. If this is the first time you've done that today, that will be it. And as you well know, your very smart machine is going to tell you exactly what day and what time and what location you were in when that selfie was taken. And if it's as smart as mine, it even puts it in a separate folder called selfies, which I think is just ridiculous. The third part of the theme is the part about leadership. And I'm just going to hold on to that thought for the moment, and I'll share some of those thoughts with you during our dinner if you're lucky enough to be there. Now what I'd like to do is welcome Bernie McSwain to the stage. Bernie is a fabulous introduction to the team, not only the team here in South Australia, but also the team at ALIA House who've put together the conference. Thank you very much, Bernie.
Thanks, Tricia. Good morning to you all. On behalf of the 2016 National Program Committee, I welcome you all to Adelaide and to South Australia. And as everyone before me has said, it's normally a lot sunnier than this, but as I said, we do need the rain. Whoops. Over the last 18 months, our program committee, consisting of Jeff, Liz, Pixie, Diane, Terry, Shane, Anna, Sarah, Lauren and I, we've worked together with Christine, Bridget and Lisa to develop a program that's intended to be thought-provoking and challenging and report on the latest developments in our profession. Our theme of engage, create and lead is as relevant today as it was when the first libraries were established over 4,000 years ago. Obviously, the tools have changed. In 2016, we need to understand and engage the broader environment in which we operate and manage our connection with it. We need to be creative in how we add value to our libraries, customers and communities. We need to maintain and grow our place and relevance in the community through change and leadership. The program is designed to facilitate discussion, challenge perceptions and assist us all to grow, as is the trade exhibition, and as Tricia said, we really encourage you to visit and support the trade. Our keynote speakers, Lorcan Dempsey, Barbara Shack, Dr Neil Carrington and Kate Tawney are all recognised leaders within their field, and they will provide a framework for us that facilitates discussion, and they're very ably supported by over 80 speakers. We hope that you all take the opportunity to be challenged, to engage, create and lead. Thank you.
You all know that we don't survive in world without partnerships. Partners at home, partners in work, and certainly in ALIA partners as well. We have partnered today with a number of suppliers and sponsors who have helped to ensure that this conference is a success. And I'd like to invite to the stage in particular Sarah Blatchford, who's the Regional Director of Taylor & Francis, and to thank them particularly for their support, as well as the support of all the other sponsors we have. So our platinum sponsor, Taylor & Francis, Sarah Blatchford.
Thank you very much. So yes, I'm ANZ Regional Director for Taylor & Francis Journals, and we are delighted to be ALIA's publishing partner. ALIA have pride of place in our Library and Information Science programme globally. But this talk is actually wearing my hat as convener of the Scholarly and Journals Committee of the Australian Publishers Association, and it concerns open access with a subtitle of A Journey of Demystification. And to begin this quick journey, I'd like to take you back to 1990 when I arrived on the first day of my job as nuclear business analyst with the Atomic Energy Authority, having recently graduated from the University of Exeter. And I looked at the impressive nameplate on the door and wondered what on earth did this job actually involve. Anyway, you'll be pleased to hear I quickly found out, but I also soon realised that as a language graduate, I could never really get to fully understand the business of nuclear fusion and radioactive waste management, other than on a financial level. So I made the move into academic publishing, delighted to be involved in an industry that concerned the dissemination of knowledge. And it ticked all my boxes, as it seemed very straightforward. It is what it is. But over time, I discovered how wrong that was, as it has become increasingly complex, as I'm sure you'll all agree, in this digital arena. And over the last 25 years, there's also been this incredible cultural shift across many parts of the world, people wanting transparency, openness, and demystification in all aspects of society. And I think the internet has catapulted us all into this incredible world where the gap has narrowed between the haves and have-nots of knowledge, and where everyone can present their perspective. So, can I just quickly move this slide down? Yeah. The open access arena is very much a part of this incredible cultural shift, bringing with it a multiplicity of considerations. And instead of presenting hundreds of slides, I've summed this up in a quick poem. Open access is gold and green, and all the shades in between. And the proposition for stakeholders, large and small, is that it's not the case that one size fits all. Each individual around the world, in every subject from A to Z, whether researcher, funder, or library, has different views on what OA policy should be. So it's important to understand the many perspectives in this arena, and underlying the changes in the academic landscape. Have I got that down again? The basic premise of scientific publishing has arguably not changed since the Royal Society set out the Minutes of Science in 1665, because peer review continues to be considered pivotal to quality publication, and this is borne out by ongoing surveys by publishers to hundreds of thousands of authors globally. And yet at the same time, speed of peer review and publication, plus discoverability and visibility, are simultaneously the major priorities for authors. And so publishers are working extensively with social media and digital service providers to help expand networks and visibility at the author and article level through collaborations with organisations like Digital Science. And the open access arena also brings to the fore many other important considerations, which are in combination serving to question and with a view to improving best practice in research and the publication of research. And these considerations include the availability and reproducibility of research data, addressing ethical practices, both in terms of research and the publication of research. Methods of peer review are being questioned, whether double-blind, single-blind, or open peer review most support diversity. And there, one might be surprised, it's actually arguably double-blind that supports diversity the most. A multitude of author licenses have evolved, with many views on what is the most preferred, again borne out by hundreds of thousands of responses from our author surveys. And this brings the corresponding need for publishers to develop very agile systems to deliver the different licenses to support different funder and research sector needs. And evidence also shows that availability of published research does not necessarily bring visibility, and many funders are looking to assess impact and engagement, the ARC being one of those, in a wider sense than just traditional impact factors of journals. And the added consideration is that accessibility doesn't just mean availability, it means that the reader needs to understand and have ability to interpret the literature. And we need to consider how the scientific literature is used in the public sphere, for example, which I would imagine is a major consideration for public librarians among you. And quality filters are needed to navigate through the literature. Brand isn't the exclusive domain of the commercial publisher. It's a learned society like ALIA, it's a university, school, or public library. And sharing of research is another key area of consideration, with the Evolution of Scholarly Collaborations Networks, or SCNs. And the International Publishing Organisation, STM, is just amidst launching an initiative called howcanishareit.com, which is designed to guide academics to those sites that are promoting sustainable and responsible sharing. So these are some key areas of the research ecosystem that are literally being opened up, examined, and demystified. And each one of these can bring, and they certainly have for me, sudden moments of understanding the many diverse perspectives at play. And there seems even greater need now, I would say, for that content curation of librarians and publishers. And we need to work together with the other stakeholders to help navigate the way to a better society where the right people have the right access to the right information at the right time. And now, adding my TNF hat back on, I invite you to come and talk with the TNF team, our books director Anthony McKenney, sales manager Nerida Fernley-Gill, and sales manager Kim Brooking, somewhere in there, for the TNF Big Breakfast on booths 30 and 51 tomorrow morning. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think we're going to have to get that poem off you. A particular thank you to our platinum sponsor, Taylor and Francis, for their support. Now, I'd like to welcome Paul Wilkins to the stage in a minute, but just before he does, we have a very special visitor. Jack Buckskin from Towndy College is going to perform a welcome to country for us. Thank you, Jack.
G'day, how are we all? I thought I'd be the first person to ask you how you feeling today, see? Nobody else, or even Uncle Martin here didn't even worry about that. Normally he's all over that, but I thought everybody's been talking about the weather here, so if you're cold here today, just bear in mind I'm dressed like this out there, and don't complain. But my name is Vincent Buckskin, really, but I don't like the name Vincent. My mum gave me that name, but everybody knows me as Jack. It's much easier to remember if you want something different to call me up. My Aboriginal name is Ganyangukut Binakudnuitja. A little bit hard for you to remember, Jack's easier. And I'm here to welcome you to the country today. I represent not only the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, but the Narungga people from over on the York Peninsula, and the Wirrungga people from a little bit further over on the west coast here. So for all the visitors of this country, it's a protocol for us to welcome new visitors to our country, and also to the old as we travel around to different areas. It's also significant to welcome you here. So in saying that, I want to just explain why my name is what it is. It seems a little bit long, but Ganya, it's my totemic name. This is the name, all us Aboriginal people have a totem, which is our responsibility, our sole responsibility. And our culture is about oneness with the environment. So we are the environment, and my name is Ganya the Rock. And I didn't get that as a kid. I asked my mum when I was younger, I said, oh, why did I get the name Ganya? And she goes, oh, well, deep down, I knew in a few years' time, when you grow a little bit older, you're going to look a lot like this guy called Dwayne. You smell what I'm cooking? That's just a slack joke, but Ganya is my totem, which rock is pretty significant in our country. We actually derive our names from our children. See, we as individuals get our responsibility, our own totem. And my youngest born son, he is Ngukud, which is the barking owl, the one with the big yellow eyes. And so because he is Ngukud, my name changes again to Ngukuitpina, the father of the barking owl, to help him with his responsibility. And our names keep on changing to our youngest born children. So, and Kudnuitja tells you I'm the third born male in my family. And we tell you as where we fit in our family, because we want to know exactly if you're the most important person in your family, or I should be talking to your bosses, your older brothers and sisters. And my sisters constantly remind me that I'm not the oldest, I'm the youngest. So we do that in our names. So in saying that, I'd like to welcome you to the country. And for my way of welcoming you to country, I'm going to sing you a song in language. And then I'm going to play a bit of the didgeridoo. The didgeridoo doesn't come from South Australia, though. It comes from Northern Territory, right up the top end in the middle. But I pay respects to the traditional owners of this instrument as well for allowing me to use their instruments. Acknowledging them for allowing me to use that. And so this song that I sing, it's a song of blessing of people and blessing of country. We sing this at different ceremonies, whether it be happy ceremonies, whether it be not so happy ceremonies. So it's a multi-purpose song. It's about boosting morale, spirit, and calling upon our spirits to join us as well. Welcome to country. Just checking that. I'm going to have a little bit of fun now. So the didgeridoo, one of the oldest instruments in the world, this has been around before we even knew that it was a musical instrument. That's how long it's been around. So as long as the trees have been around, this instrument's been around. So you can say it's definitely one of the oldest. And I'd like to play this one, showing you some of the traditional sounds of the didgeridoo, and I'm going to mix it up a little bit, because we're living in this two worlds today. We hold on to our culture, but we live in this Western world as well. So I think I might mix it up a little bit and show you something, bring the oldest instrument into the new age as well. Any dancers? No? Okay. Italia.
Thank you so much, Jack. That's a hard act to follow. I'm privileged to sit on the board of the Indigenous Literacy Foundation as well, so I get to go to community occasionally, which is fantastic. And the didgeridoo just eats you inside, doesn't it? It's an amazing sound. So we're very lucky to have that brilliant exhibition. Thank you. So, back to the real world for a minute. And for those of you like me, you were probably sitting up in the desert with the starry sky and a glass of something good from McLaren Vale. That was where I was anyway. But back to the real world. I want to welcome to the podium in a minute Paul Wilkins, who's the librarian at the Bar Smith Library at our University of Adelaide. Although he tells me he's acting librarian, but we're not going to worry about that too much at the moment. And we thank enormously the University of Adelaide for their sponsorship for this keynote. And Paul is going to introduce Lorcan Dempsey, which is a treat for us this morning. Thank you very much, Paul and Lorcan.
Well, good morning. Yes, I'm Paul Wilkins, the acting university librarian at the University of Adelaide. The library has been going through a period of in-depth review over the past year or so, and we produced a report, The Future Library, which I'm pleased to say seems to be in considerable interest in the sector. And in fact, I was at a pre-conference seminar yesterday when a quote from that report came up on the screen. But I hope that we will see a good number of you visiting these dreaming spires and our special collections, but some of the transformation has already begun, and I hope some of you will also be visiting our VR experimental booth in the exhibition. The University of Adelaide is very pleased and honoured to be sponsoring this keynote session with Lorcan Dempsey. Lorcan is very well known to us all, I think, as a thought leader in our profession across all sectors. And I know a lot of you follow regularly his blogs and tweets. Thank you for those, Lorcan. According to Wikipedia, which, as some of you would know, Lorcan so creatively termed that addressable knowledge base, Lorcan's interested in the impact of changing patterns of research and learning on libraries, in libraries as public institutions, and in the architecture of digital information environments. And from a very, very quick preview of his presentation, I think some of that will come through in it. Lorcan's influence on national policies and library directions is widely recognised. Lorcan has had an international career working for library and educational organisations both in Ireland, his home state, the UK and the United States. His current position is Chief Strategist and Vice President Membership and Research with OC-LC. Previous positions included the management of the UK higher education national investment in the information services through GISC. Lorcan has received many awards and recognitions for his contribution. In 2010, he received the National Federation Advanced Information Science highest award, the Miles Conrad Award. He has twice received the ALCTS Presidential Citation and has also been honoured with an honorary doctorate from the United Kingdom Open University. So we're very pleased to welcome you, Lorcan. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to what you have to say on futures, library futures converging and diverging. Please join me in welcoming Lorcan.
Thank you very much for that. I'm on. Everybody can hear me. Everybody can see me. Yeah. As Paul said, I did grow up in Ireland, so the obligatory weather reference is it's lovely. It's really nice seeing rain. Also nice seeing mountains and potentially the sea, given we live in Ohio, which is very far away from either mountains or sea. So after that nice introduction, it's all downhill from there. I don't like talking to audiences like this. I shouldn't say that. But I was sort of, I got the invitation and I thought it'd be nice to come to Adelaide. And when I say I don't like talking to audiences like this, obviously I don't mean it. What I mean is that in the last few years, I found it difficult to talk to general library audiences. So library audiences across sectors and then also across individual libraries. So talking to people who do different things in the library and talking to people from different libraries. And in thinking about it, I thought, well, maybe what I might do in the presentation is talk a little bit about that. And thinking about it again, it seemed to me that individual libraries are getting different in certain ways, which is why it makes it difficult sometimes to talk about them together. But at the same time, you can see ways in which they're coming together in various ways, and engage and create are two strong words in that context. So what I thought I'd do is try and put together some thoughts about the ways in which different types of libraries are both becoming more unlike each other, but then at the same time are responding to a variety of pressures and changes that are in fact very, very similar. So that's what I'm going to do. I haven't done a version of this before. I haven't really spoken about these things before, so you'll have to bear with me. Yeah, that's me. Just I noticed the Twitter handle tends to get lost on the page, so I thought I would remind people that it's there. Speaking of names earlier, I have an Irish name which is not very common. The first time I went to the US, I was just thinking about this. I was introduced as Lorcan Dempsey. Anyway. So here's an overview of what I'm going to say. I know some people like to know where they're going in advance, and I like to keep people happy. So this is an overview of where I'm going. Speaking of keeping people happy, the last time I did a presentation that was evaluated, I got an evaluation back saying, well, he didn't really tell us anything new, did he? And I thought, well, I could take that two ways. I could take it, it's not very nice. On the other hand, maybe I did manage to say something that reflected the way things really were. So as you can see from this quick flyover here, you're going to be very familiar with most of what I say. There's not going to be anything very new, but hopefully I might say a few things or put it in a context that might be interesting. That does remind me, speaking of evaluations and thinking of Lorcan Dempsey, the most hurtful evaluation that I got was Dempsey is better on paper than he is in person. And as you can tell, that was many years ago. So obviously, it stayed with me. But I'm not bitter. So what I'm going to do is frame it a little bit by talking about the library and the life of the user and suggesting that this is a major reason why individual libraries are moving in different directions. And the library and the life of the user is a phrase that we've been using. We didn't originate it. There's some literature there. My colleague Lynn Conaway, who does a lot of user studies, has been really looking at this more closely. And what do we mean? If you think about some context, IFLA was mentioned, Columbus, Pat Lazinski, one of the organizers of IFLA the other week in Columbus, is the CEO of Columbus Metropolitan Library. Columbus Metropolitan Library is very successful in US terms. It's a leading public library, widely looked to as an example, and is very successful in a Columbus context. And I was very struck a couple of years ago when I had lunch with Pat, and he was talking about his own career, but he was talking about the types of things that were important to him as the director of a large urban public library system. And he said 20 years ago he would have described himself as being in the libraries business. Today, he said, he's in the Columbus business. His job is to make Columbus a better place to live. It's to make Columbus a better place to work. It's to improve the lives of the citizens who live in Columbus. It's to improve the educational opportunities available to people who live in Columbus. His job is to make Columbus a better place to live. And I was quite interested in the remarks earlier about Adelaide and the livability and the contribution to that. So his job is to make Columbus a better place to live. And he's very clear about that, and that's what drives him, and that's his focus. Columbus is also the home of Ohio State University, one of the biggest public universities in the US, over 50,000 students. And it has a new library director, and he's been talking about his priorities. And I was quite struck by how he put the job that he has taken on. So he said, to be vital to the academic enterprise, the libraries must position itself as an active, engaged participant in solving university-level problems. So his job is not to manage information, to provide access to books and journals. His job is to solve university-level problems. And to solve university-level problems, he has to understand where the university is going. He has to understand what it is that his constituency needs and wants, and he has to make the university a better place for them. He has to improve the ways in which they do things, and they have to feel that he is solving their problems. That is how he puts his job. And it occurred to me that this really is not new or strange, but it reflects really a change that we've seen over the last few years in how we talk about libraries. So 20 years ago, 15 years ago, our traditional model was one in which we thought of the user in the life of the library. We'd be thinking about the user coming into our library, using our collections, using our systems, interacting with our staff. We think about the library as something to which users came, and that was the same on the network. People come to the website, so it's our library to which users come, and the user in effect has to organize themselves around the library. They have to figure out how to use the library and adapt what they do to use the library. Today, though, we don't really talk like that anymore. Now the way we talk about things is we talk about the library in the life of the user. The job for the library is to get into the life of the user in important ways, in ways that make things better, in ways that fit into the way they want to do things. We have to meet the reader, we have to meet the researcher, we have to meet the learner, not expect them to adapt to us. So in trying to characterize this shift, we're saying that increasingly we're thinking about the library in the life of the user. Now we have an office in Seattle, and my colleagues who work there work on something called Web Junction, a learning platform for public libraries. And one of them gave me this really quite nice example, Bainbridge Public Library, sort of an island off Seattle. So a lot of people commute to Seattle on the ferry. And what the library said was, well, these users, our users, are spending a lot of their time on this boat. Why aren't we there? Why aren't we meeting those users where they are? So they began looking at providing a book group on the ferry, on the boat, once a month. So they were thinking about how to put the library into the life of the user on the boat. So because we're thinking about putting the library into the life of the user, the primary determinant of library services is the life of the user. It's the community that the library fits into and the way in which that community is changing. It's the ways in which research and learning are changing that are the primary driver for academic library services. It's not library technology, it's not publishing, it's not these other things. It's the way in which research and learning is changing. It's the types of things that people want to do when they're doing research, when they're doing learning. It's their behaviors, workflows. It's those things that are the drivers of library services. So in terms of thinking about some of the ways in which those changing things have affected the way in which we think about things, here's a list. Now, what I'm doing here is using PowerPoint in the way that PowerPoint is supposed to be used, very dense, with lots of text. I think really people have got very soft in their use of PowerPoint with all these pictures and things. What we need is text, and lots of text. And you might read that you don't need text, but how else are you going to get your message across? So from a collections point of view, we've moved from a print logic, we've moved from just-in-time collections, amassing a big hill of stuff that you put close to a user, to sort of thinking about, well, how do we provide people with the information that they need? And I'll talk a little bit about this later, but I think we're reconfiguring collections around the user, reconfiguring collections around distinctive materials, and reconfiguring collections around the creative process. Not just the product, the output, but around the creative process. If you think about people, the classic model of the library was that the library is neutral. And also there was a certain anonymity. You didn't have photographs of library staff, you didn't have personality, because somehow that was felt not quite right. The library had to be neutral. Increasingly, though, we recognize that if the library is to be seen as an expert, its expertise needs to be visible. You have to show that you're an expert. You have to attach that expertise to real people who can solve problems for you. And then you have to try and create relationships with those people so that they can do good work for you. So to be seen as an expert, your expertise has to be visible. It can't be masked behind a neutral website. At the same time, libraries increasingly are partners in the creative process, in the learning process, and they're advocates for their users. So they're not neutral, they're partners, and they are advocates. From a systems point of view, our systems were largely about managing the collection. Increasingly, we're looking at managing workflows, we're managing relationships, we talk about customer relationship management, we have to provide support for digital scholarship, thinking about social media. So very much a shift in the way we think about systems, not just systems to manage the collections, but systems to manage a whole range of relationships, a social environment, workflows, relationships. From a place point of view, our places were configured around collections. Now we're configuring our places around user experiences. We're no longer configuring, or we're trying to move away from spaces configured around collections to spaces configured around user experiences, and I'll say something about that. And I think really quite importantly, and slightly subtle maybe, but the model of organizational excellence, the libraries were bureaucracies, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean that technically everybody understood what the library was, and the library had a particular job to do, and a good library was a library who did that job well. They ordered things efficiently, they arranged them, they described them, they provided good reference services. Everybody knew what the library was doing, everybody knew what the jobs were. The good library was the library that did those jobs well. Now, because the environment is changing, because our communities are changing, we have to think about what are the sources of value that those communities want to see the library provide. What is it that the community expects the library to do? And the library has to really be more enterprising. It has to think about the resources it has, and it has to think about how to allocate those resources in ways that do actually respond to the ways in which the communities are changing. So the library has to shift from being a bureaucracy, which the ends are known, we know what we're doing, and really it's about making sure that the means are efficient, to a more enterprising view where the ends are changing, where perhaps you have to think about doing things in different ways, think about different services, and you have to shift resources around that. And that's a sort of big change, I think, that we can see happening across libraries. So, in that context, this is Google Maps looking at Columbus. So you've got Ohio State University, the Thompson Library on the top, large, big, new library. Near the bottom, you've got Columbus Metropolitan Library. Each of those libraries just been rebuilt. And what I'm saying is that over the last 20 years, really they're beginning to diverge in what they're looking at, but they're coming together in other ways. So 20 years ago, they both bought collections. They both had reference staff. They both had inquiry desks. Today, the Thompson, the academic library, is thinking about how do they support digital scholarship? How do they support research data management? How do they create new digital literacy programs? Columbus Metropolitan Library is thinking about homework. It's thinking about support for immigrants. It's thinking about health in Columbus setting. It's thinking about how it improves the life of that community. So, convergence and divergence. So in terms of thinking about this, it seems to me that from a divergent point of view, libraries are increasingly focused on understanding the source of their value within the communities that they serve and responding to that. What problems are they solving for their community? What does their community value them for, and how do they move to addressing that in effective and useful ways? And I think, you know, just from a very summary point of view, from an academic point of view, I think it's clear that you can begin to see academic libraries focusing much more on research support, on making researchers productive, on helping researchers, and on successful students, on student success, on retention, on making the students' lives better. So those two things really coming to the fore. And depending on the type of library, the type of university, the type of setting, you know, they will have relative importance. In a more teaching-oriented institution, big focus on student success. If you think about public libraries, you know, very focused on improving the lives of citizens, thinking about learning, thinking about creativity, thinking about life stages, thinking about moving people through a life of learning and creativity, and at the same time focused on strong communities, focused on the things that make communities strong. So if you think about how they describe themselves, if you think about how they talk about themselves, increasingly they talk in terms of these types of things, rather than in terms of the processes, the collections, the buildings, and so on, which once they may have talked about. At the same time, though, it's very clear that there are sort of similar pressures moving. Now, the core, historic core, if you like, of the library, if you think about from a functional point of view, you had collections and you had places. And as I said, I think from a collection point of view, both public libraries and academic libraries are beginning to, or have been, reconfiguring around the user, around the distinctive, and around the creative process. From a place point of view, as I said, reconfiguring around the user experience. So they're doing that in different ways. There's a shared direction, but it's variably executed. But I think there's a clear direction there. And then, this is sort of slightly random in some ways, because you could have a much longer list. But in thinking about it, three areas sort of swum to the surface as areas where people are really thinking about what they need to do in sort of similar ways, even though they're variably executed in different environments. So story, increasingly having to reconfigure the way you talk about the library in terms of sources of value to the community. What is it that the community values, and telling the story in that way? And clearly that relates then to metrics, to assessment, to a variety of other things. But reconfiguring the story of the library around what those sources of value are. I think the symbolic value of the library as well, we've seen a sort of shift in the symbolic value of the library. Now, the symbolic value of the library is where the library is manifesting in some way community value or community identity. But if you think about the new libraries that are built, the ways in which libraries are talking about themselves, a focus on community, on connection, on openness, on creation, rather than necessarily a focus on the collection or the hush. So very much that connection, openness, and I'll say a little bit about that. And finally, skills, that skills have to diversify, but also there's this issue about making that diverse expertise visible, making it visible to user communities what it is that the libraries are doing. So I'm going to say a little bit about each of those things. So collections, configuring around the user, the distinctive, and the creative process. From a user point of view, I think we're seeing a move from, we used to have owned and licensed collections, physically brought together, and we still have those, but we're moving to collections that sort of meet research and learning needs in the best way possible, and they're more facilitated, they're organized around just researchers in various ways, or learners. And if you think about the move here, we began with the borrowed collection, the library hadn't got everything itself, so a borrowed material from elsewhere. Then we had the licensed collection, you begin to license materials from elsewhere. We now have the demand-driven collection as there's more use of patron-driven acquisitions, demand-driven acquisitions, that the shift goes from the just-in-case library selected to the just-in-time reader selected. And then we've been looking at a variety of ways in which we can pool library collections, acknowledging that on the network there's value in aggregation, that individual libraries may not have that gravitational attraction that network hubs tend to have. So we can see a growing interest in shared print, pulling together print collections, growing interest in digital collections. You've got Trove, you've got things like DPLA or Europeana, and a variety of new scholarly resources that are pulling together resources from a variety of places. But then at the same time, what I've called here the external collection, people are pointing to Google Scholar within their services. They're including freely available ebooks in their catalog, and they're creating resource guides for web resources. I think the huge explosion in the use of resource guides is really quite interesting. It's a place where you really do develop the facilitated collection. You say, what types of resources are appropriate for particular users? How do I organize things around user interests? If you think about an Australian context and those shared collections, those are examples there of initiatives there. So I think we're seeing a gradual move of collections, rather than being assembled, owned, licensed, to a range of services that are arrayed around user needs. Now, the library has always played a role in creation. And my favorite quotes, the people who talk and write about libraries in ways that I find most congenial are people who emphasize the generative role of the library, the creative role of the library, that the library is part of the cycle of creation. It's part of the creative process. Now, because we manage the physical outputs of creation historically, we tended to lose sight of that a little bit. But the top quote there by Irish writer Sean O'Whalon, I think, is sort of saying the important thing about the National Library of Ireland, he's saying, is the books that come out of it, not the books that go into it. So what he's saying is that the readers there, that the people there, the people who use the library are using the library in a creative way to support the creation of their further work. And we know this. I mean, it's what academics do. It's what the Daniel Dennett quoted there, a scholar is just a library's way of making another library. But I think in the physical world, we tended to lose sight of that a little bit. We tended to lose sight of the fact that it's the books that come out of the library that are more important maybe than the books that go into it. In the digital world, we're very much aware of that. Here is a schematic that some of my colleagues have done looking at the scholarly record, the research process. So the library historically managed that blue box in the middle, the outputs, the outcomes, the books and the journals. They licensed them, they bought them. But the whole process around it, the whole creative process happened elsewhere. Now that that's moving into a digital environment, you have, from an experimental point of view, people interested in methods. You have huge interest in evidence. This is people interested in research data. And then discussion. You have preprints, you have commentary, you have working papers. So in a digital environment, all of those things sort of come into play. They're no longer hidden behind the final output, but they're actually things that people might want to manage or to look at. So the process is becoming as important as the product. And at the same time, there's materials enter a world where they're discussed, where they're revised, where they're reused, they're used in course packs, they're used in other things. So this whole environment means that we're no longer just managing the stable, fixed outputs. We're looking at this really creative environment. And if you think about what libraries are doing, they're very much having to respond to this. And I think part of this is we're seeing this move from managing consumption to managing creation, managing the full life cycle, or providing support for that. So you want to support the process as well as the product, making as well as taking, as it were. So thinking about copyright advice, bibliometrics advice, research data management, digital scholarship, digital humanities, how do we support those? And in this context, I think workflow is the new content, if you like. So the digital science companies were mentioned earlier. If you look at Elsevier's portfolio with Mendeley and Pure and various other things, increasingly, we're seeing a range of workflow products emerge that are very closely bound up with the content. And if you think about social networking on ResearchGate or academia.edu or Google Scholar, the whole generation and use of that content is sort of now increasingly bound up with a range of tools and services for discovery, for management, for disclosure, for accounting, for measuring. And this is something that libraries becoming much more, and publishers becoming much more interested in. Support for publishing and digital scholarship. And increasingly, I think this means that we have an inside-out perspective as well as an outside-in one. When libraries were just interested in the product, they had a sort of outside-in perspective. They'd license journals, they'd buy books. Now, their institutions are creating materials that they have to push out to the outside world, pushing out preprints, pushing out research data, pushing out expertise profiles of faculty. So they're having to manage institutional assets and share those institutional assets with the world. So this inside-out perspective becoming really, really important, and an important new area where the library supports the institution in terms of sharing what it has with the world, in terms of open access agenda, in terms of reputation management, in terms of the evolving way in which research and learning are done. At the same time, if you think about public libraries, the digital environment has also changed the world. If you think about publishing of books, we now have a large number of self-published books. We don't know quite how big it is compared to the more large publisher-generated material. This is an example from Sacramento City Library, where the library has a publishing program. This is a user of the library who was a refugee who wrote the story of her journey and worked with the library then to publish, distribute, and promote that. So the library increasingly supporting the creative processes of their author, of their readers, acknowledging that their readers are authors and supporting them as authors as well as readers, supporting that creative life. Many libraries doing what's discussed here. Once a year, this public library in Indiana asks users to mail in materials, and they are added to the collection, collecting materials from users in a variety of ways. Imago, quite interesting, hang out, mess around, geek out. This is developed by Chicago Public Libraries, but sort of thinking about, we support homework, which is sort of creation. We have sort of maker spaces, but there's a range of creative, interactive, communication, activities that sort of relate sometimes to digital media, to creation, and how to support that type of looser, creative, exploratory, discovery activity. That's not just using a discrete item, it's this looser activity. So a variety of libraries looking at this hang out, mess around, geek out model. From next door, almost, I was quite interested in looking at this. In fact, one of my colleagues had already seen mention of the story wall, and heard when I was coming to Adelaide, said, oh, you should mention this, so I am mentioning this. And really quite interesting and very nice quote there. In terms of, again, this shift, the movement from being a custodian, the movement from supporting consumption to enabling creative process, because associated with this you do have the ability to participate in various ways. So thinking about digital literacy, thinking about creation, thinking about the process by which things are made, not just managing the products of what somebody else has made, but managing and supporting and enabling and encouraging and advocating for the creative processes within the communities that libraries serve, whether those are public or academic. And quite interesting here as well, I'll say something a bit later about memory and war. I was interested in the mention of GLAM. I was in Oxford recently, and the Bodleian Libraries are now part of an organizational context called GLAM. But interestingly, the G there doesn't stand for galleries, it stands for gardens. Gardens, libraries, archives, and museums, which makes sense given botanical gardens, herbaria, and so on. But I was struck by that listening to the comment earlier. So increasingly, collections reconfigured around creative processes. At the same time, collections are being reconfigured around the distinctive, around what is a particular local interest, what is a particular local specialty, what is a particular competence or a particular interest of the institution or the community that the library serves. So this is the House of Literature in Quebec Public Library, and you can see behind quite nicely arranged. Now, I'm not quite sure I've achieved this correctly, but the picture of the person on my right is an inset. What they have is, interspersed in the shelves, they have these monitors where you can see representations of characters in the novels speaking, which I really thought was quite nice. But in a general context of thinking about supporting local cultures, supporting the distinctive, reconfiguring around the distinctive in the context of a global collection. So this is another example, Oak Park Public Library, the special collections creating specific cultural and heritage collections that reflect unique values and enduring legacies of Oak Park. So what they're doing, again, is focusing on what is specific, what is distinctive, and managing that at the same time as supporting the creative process. So reaching out to local authors, to local creators, and supporting them. So that was collections. If you think about places, we're reconfiguring around user experiences. This is a picture of Temple Library in Philadelphia. It's a plan. It's not yet built. It's by the Snøhetta architect that did North Carolina State University, which has got a lot of publicity. But the space is directly related to the collection. And this is a quote from Joe Lucia, sort of saying that we have to reduce print collections because we want to introduce better engagement with researchers. So a direct relationship between reducing print and the introduction of digital scholarship, digital humanities research data services. So that relationship, that connection, really quite important. Almere Public Library in the Netherlands, designed by somebody who designs department stores. And really, they focused on separate departments. And you can see the coloring above the shelves. That's a sort of thematic. So they have an individual piece for DIY, one for fiction, and then arranging these materials in ways that pull the readers in. And it's not just big libraries. This is a small library in Columbus Metropolitan Library for Columbus State, a community college, to do teaching. Teen area, much more computers, study rooms, meeting rooms, and we're all familiar with this. So I think what we're seeing from a use of space is moving to higher value use of space. Specialist expertise, specialist exhibitions, specialist equipment, places where you have a higher value interaction. This is the Clark Library at University of Michigan. It was a map library, and now it's a center for spatial data, for interaction with specialist equipment with expertise. One of the interesting things that I think about this move is the emphasis on light, on openness, and we're seeing a lot of new library building. There's an example there from Sydney where it says accessibility, openness, transparency, and sustainability key values, as well as a general sense of aspiration. On the left, a quote from a Times Higher Education Supplement article recently. I put it in just to say 19 universities either moved into a new library or refurbished an existing one in the past 2 years. So a big move to new. But also, as I said earlier, a move to openness, to light, to connection, to thinking about configuring around experiences. So that's a little used feature of PowerPoint. It just comes as standard. I'm surprised we don't see it more. So if you think then about academic, so this is, even though I started late. Mm-hmm.
We'll have to cut out questions, I think.
Yeah. So if you think about academic libraries, I said productive researchers and successful students. And I think we can see this. The report was mentioned earlier about the future University of Adelaide. And just out of interest, I took a list of the recommendations and I had a look at them. And I'm not going to go through them, but you can see that a large number of the recommendations cluster around successful students, improving learning experience, improving management of learning. And they cluster around productive researchers, making the research process more effective, providing services for researchers. If you think about other of the other sets of recommendations, the collections, they're talking about reconfiguring collections, reducing print, thinking about highlighting special collections. So very much in line with this move around collections. And then if you think about place, really talking about how to reconfigure the place around the user experience. So I thought it was really quite interesting looking at that report. And you can put the majority, I think, of the recommendations under those 4 headings.
5 minutes.
This advert came out recently from University of Westminster, and it's looking at putting the library alongside a range of student success services. So they've actually brought together libraries and curriculum support. If you look at research support in institutions, emerging research support linking in with other parts of the organization. Public libraries, as I said, lives of learning and creativity, strong communities, big focus on maker movements when we talk about this, but as people in the audience know, there's huge diversity of services here. And various of them were talked about in this report commissioned by Queensland State Libraries. But I just thought it was interesting the way in which they characterized the value framework, the way in which you might capture or measure some of that. So idea building, civic engagement, community development, cultural participation, health and well-being, educational attainment, economic productivity. The Urban Libraries Council has innovation awards every year, and they have sort of very similar lists. They're saying, what is it that people value about public libraries? And they say, you probably can't read that, learning birth through teens, learning adults, then collections, customer experience, positioning the library, workforce, race and social equity, civic and community engagement. So really focusing on that set of activities.
Pretty well done.
So if we move on then to the final 3 elements that I mentioned. Story, I think increasingly libraries are reconfiguring what they do around sources of value to the community. Damon Jaggers again, the library must become more sophisticated in how it identifies and presents stories of success. Eleanor Jo Roger, very influential writer on public libraries in the US, says the library must understand the host system, must do their work well, But they must understand the source of their claim to being a legitimate part of their system. So how do they create value? How do they provide value in that context? And I think a lot of our discussion about value needs to figure that out first. As we change, as we move, what is the source of our value in that context?
Couple of minutes.
Columbus Metropolitan Library has a very nice way of doing this. They talk about young minds, my library, and life skills. This is what they use to talk to their constituency. So they focus on telling a story that relates to value. Monash, I was going to go through this, but what they have done is they've organized their website around libraries, collections, research and learning skills, which is student success, managing research data. So again, really focused on what it is about the institution that is important. Symbol, manifesting community value and identity. Big focus on this. This is Doc 2, which has very much revitalized Aarhus in Denmark, and the community has come together to say, how does the library do that? So the library increasingly seen as a symbol of the changing ways in which research, learning, community is enacted in communities. And it's not just big libraries. This is an example in a town in Washington where the library is across the river because of the salmon, but also it reflects the industrial heritage of the city. So it really captures in a very nice way the library. Skills, as I said, making diverse expertise visible. This is a particular library in Colorado. They begin calling their staff Wrangler, Guide, and Concierge, and emphasizing what it is that they do. So I am going to wrap up now with, so what I'm talking about is the sources of value of public and academic, collections and places, which is ways in which they're suffering or they're having similar pressures but responding in different ways, and really a focus on story, symbol, and skills as types of things that the library has to adapt to and change. So I want to finish by saying this is a quote about what the library is. The library is a place that has no agenda other than allowing people to invent their own agendas, which I think is a very good quote. Now, the issue, though, is that to do that, the library has to have an agenda. To help the library has to have an agenda, and I think the agenda is to be an advocate and a partner in the learning, creating, and remembering lives of their users. So the agenda of the library is to be a partner and an advocate for learning, creating, and remembering. And I'll conclude with two examples. One is the Linen Hall Library in Belfast. This is a quote from Robert Fisk. No politician, no government can conceal the sins and omissions of the past or conceal the possibilities for the future when an ordinary member of the public can walk into the Linen Hall Library and find the record of what all sides said in 1969 or 1974, 1989, or today. So the library is supporting creativity, but it's also supporting memorying. It has an agenda to collect across the community in Northern Ireland so that people can prospect what is there and understand what happened in the community. Currently in the US, we're seeing a lot of issues that you will have seen around in Ferguson, in a range of other places about race. This is the public library in Dallas. So in the wake of the community tragedies, they are collecting police badges. They want to make them part of the collection. They want to remember what happened here, and in the future they want to be a testament to what happened. So libraries are very much remembering what happened. They have an agenda to support creation. They have an agenda